My agent calls me and says, Shirin, the Metropolitan Opera wants you to sing in Carmen next season. My dream role, dream opera house, dream opera, really good pay. I, of course, said yes, but I'll never forget. I hung up the phone and I had dreamed of this moment for so long. And I'd always imagined that if I ever got to work at the Met, I would finally realize that I was good enough. And the only thought in my mind was, you're not good enough for this. You don't deserve this.
Welcome to Unbehaved. I'm Megan French Dunbar, and you just heard from my guest today, Shirin Eskandani, talking about the moment she landed her dream role, the one she'd been working for her entire life, and somehow still she didn't feel like she was enough. What happened after this call is something that I wish more of us did. Instead of blowing right past her feelings of not being good enough or trying to stay so busy that she didn't really have time to pause and feel them again, I may or may not be speaking from experience, Shirin started to examine why she felt this way. She started unpacking that old playbook that tells us if we behave by working hard enough to achieve at the highest levels, we'll finally be happy or we'll finally feel like we're enough. And what she found was a whole new playbook, one that has finally made her feel like not only is she enough, but it's made her feel truly joyful. We're going to talk about her journey, the limiting beliefs that so many of us hold that she learned to let go of along the way, and what to do when you realize that all the perfectionism, performing, and achieving in the world aren't really going to be the things that actually make you happy. I absolutely loved this conversation and hope it lands with you the way that it landed with me. Let's get into it. Can we hear a little bit about your journey? How did you get to where you are today? Perhaps with the lens of ways in which you have been told to behave throughout your life and the stories that that has brought up for you.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. First, thank you so much for having me here. I'm so thrilled to be having this conversation with you and getting to meet your community. Yeah, there's been a lot of unruly behavior when I look at my history, and I foresee a lot more of it in the future.
Yes.
Let's start at the beginning. So my family immigrated from Iran to Canada when I was 4 years old. Being an immigrant, we moved to a part of Canada. We went to Vancouver. At the time, it was predominantly white, especially the neighborhood that we moved in. And for me, just being like one of a handful of, children of color was a very formative experience for me. And I know usually we use formative kind of in like a positive way, but like it really did form a lot of the ideas and beliefs that I had about myself. And I think, what I'm about to share, I think a lot of folks can identify with. I felt kind of like I didn't have a sense of belonging, or I couldn't see myself in a lot of spaces. And so what I kind of soon discovered as a young girl was that when I was well behaved, when I was excellent at what I did, when I was as perfect as I could possibly be, was when I was seen.
Mm-hmm.
And so this kind of narrative shaped so much of my early life, that as long as I am the best, I am trying my hardest, and I am being perfect, I will belong, I will have value, I am worthy. Which sounds like a nightmare right? But at the time, right, it was working. And I think, what's really tough about, perfectionism, being a hard worker, being your quote unquote best, is that these are, I call them coping mechanisms, but what we generally call them, right, is like our values. It's like they're so incredibly celebrated in our society. Right. So it's such a kind of negative cycle. So here I am as a young girl, not feeling like I belong. And I discovered that by being perfect, I could belong and I could be seen and I would have value. And one of those spaces in which I actually did feel like I belonged when I was young, without having to be perfect, without having to work super, super hard, was when I was on stage, when I was singing. So when I was like, I think in the first grade, I was singing with other kids, and one of the teachers was like, wait a second, like this girl's got some pipes on her, and told my mom and said, I think Shirin has like just some natural ability there. And I come from a really musical family. This teacher didn't know. Like, I come from like a line of singers. My grandmother, my great grandmother were famous singers in Iran who were very unbehaved in what they were doing. And so when this teacher told my parents that, they were like, amazing, fantastic. Like they put me in choirs. They just really allowed me to express myself in this way. And it really was where I felt like the most me was when I was on stage performing and singing. And so I don't know when it was, but I saw my first opera and I was like, that is what I'm going to do. I am going to be an opera singer. Like, I just like with that, that ambition and love and just like beautiful naivete of being young, right? Where like you just fathom things not working out. I was
Mhm.
like, this is what I'm going to move to New York. I am going to become an opera singer and I'm going to sing at the the Metropolitan Opera. Like, I like put this into the universe, right? At the age of probably like 8 or something. And, as I got older, I kind of I was a better singer. I kept getting better and better. However, at the same time, those qualities of perfectionism and overworking, quote unquote, hardworking, were kind of creeping into my singing.
Yeah.
So I got accepted into a really great school in Canada. I did my undergrad there, and I was kind of like a big fish in a little pond. I was really good at what I did. I worked really hard, and I was able to really shine there. And for my master's, I decided I was going to apply to like the top 5 music schools in the US and Canada. I was like, that's it. These will be the only ones. And I got accepted to the Manhattan School of Music in New York. And I thought to myself, I'm like, this is it. It's happening. I'm moving to New York. I'm going to be singing at the Met in no time. Here we go. And I arrive in New York, and all of a sudden, I realize that there is nothing special about me. Right? That, like, I moved like, everyone at my school was talented. Everyone at my school was hardworking. Actually, some of them weren't even hardworking, and they were, like, amazing at what they did. And all of a sudden, that whole identity that I built for myself started to, like, crumble underneath me. And, of course, I didn't have, like, the wisdom to say, "Hey, you know what? Like, why don't we do some internal work here and unpack some of this stuff?" Like, that wasn't even this was, like, 20 years ago. And I was young and I was like, no, 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 no. The answer to this is to double down on the hustle, is to double
Mhm.
down on working hard, is to double down on being perfect, is to double down on being the best. And that did work for a while. So I graduated from my music school, and I was like one of a few, of the graduates who was working right away. So I was working at different opera houses, I was apprenticing, I was working in Europe. I had like what you would say like a dream career. Like this, if I'd written it on a piece of paper, this was exactly it. And everyone from the outside was like, "Wow, look at Shirin. She's living in New York. She's singing, she's living the dream." And Megan, it was anything but a dream, right? Because the way in which I was doing it was so unkind and unforgiving and uncompromising, right? I was getting work, but like all I could focus on was like the work that I didn't get. I was singing really well, but all I could focus on was the things that I wasn't doing well vocally. And so all of this, right? The how was really making me miserable and exhausted in a field that's already quite demanding. Like, the arts is just any type of artistic pursuit is very demanding on the person, and I was making it, like, doubly harder for myself. And I reached a point where I was like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. I think I need to, like, figure out another path," which was terrifying because I had poured so much of myself into this. This was my whole identity from when I was a young girl. I couldn't imagine myself not doing it, but I also couldn't imagine continuing doing it like in the way that I was doing it. And I didn't know how to not do it that way. Like that to me was just how you were supposed to get it done. Right now I have the language for what I was doing, but back then that was just like, this is how you do it, right? This is how you get it done. And at that very low point, I get the call that I've like quite literally been waiting for my entire life. A year previous, I had had an audition at the Metropolitan Opera, which I thought I had totally botched. And my agent calls me and says, Shirin, the Metropolitan Opera wants you to sing in Carmen next season. right? This was like my literal dream come true. You know, when you like have a dream and there's like a couple things that are off about it, and you're like, this was to a T exactly what I had always wanted. My dream role, dream opera house, dream opera, really good pay. I, of course, said yes. But I'll never forget, I hung up the phone and I had imagined and dreamed of this moment for so long, for so, so long. And I'd always imagined that if I ever got to work at the Met, I would finally realize that I was good enough. I would finally realize I had made it. I'd finally realize that like everything I was doing was right, was good, was like yes, confidence. And I'll never forget. I hung up that phone and realized I felt none of those things. And the only thought in my mind was, you're not good enough for this. You don't deserve this. And in that moment, like I woke up and I realized that like nothing outside of me was ever going to heal that wound, was ever going to convince me that I was good enough, would ever convince me that I belonged and I was worthy and I was valuable. I was pursuing things outside of me to make me feel that way. And here I was with that perfect external thing. Like I couldn't have changed one thing about this to make it more perfect. And even that couldn't fill that hole within me. And I was like, you need help. Like you need to seek out some help. And so I had a year and a half to prepare for the role. And of course, I, worked on my voice. I worked on, my craft. But what I had never worked on before and I really started working on was myself. So I was going to therapy and I started to work with a coach. And that just shifted everything for me. Just that process of self-awareness and realization and growth. And I say, I always say to people that my greatest achievement in life isn't singing at the Met, but it was singing at the Met and enjoying every part of the process. When I stood on that stage to take a bow every night and people were clapping and cheering, I knew and I felt in my bones that I belonged there, that I was worthy of being up on that stage. If let's say it was a performance that was not as optimal, it didn't matter. I had that inner resilience and those tools to be able to, ground myself and be present. And it was just such an enjoyable and amazing experience, right? And it was a very high pressure environment too, right? Like imagine going to the Olympics. And I was just able to be in the joy of it all. And in that process, I kind of really rediscovered my love of singing again. I rediscovered myself again. I found all these amazing tools. And I discovered that I no longer wanted to be a singer. Which is like, wait, that's not where the story's supposed to go. You're supposed to like, right? Now you go on and you sing in other places. I work with a lot of clients who are at a career transition. And I deeply believe that if we can get back to what we used to love about that thing and why we cared about it so much, we can make a really clear decision as to whether we want to stay or go. And a decision where we don't regret it later on, a decision where we really feel as good as possible. Because even when you're ready to leave something, we know this about relationships. It still is hard, right? Even if you're like, I am so done with this thing, it's still challenging, right? But I really realized with clear eyes, not any narrative that was like, oh, I'm leaving because I'm not good enough. Oh, I'm leaving because I can't handle it. None of that. I really was able to see the career for what it was. And it wasn't a career that aligned with what I wanted anymore. My values as now a 30-year-old woman and the things that I wanted in a life, I just was like, I don't think I can create that here. And so I decided to just, and it sounds so silly because most people are like, opera singing is a very unconventional career, but it wasn't to me. I got my master's. I'd put so much of myself into it. I was doing this with such diligence and so much ethic and work ethic, but all those years of like pouring myself into it, money and time and tears. And I was like, no, this isn't it anymore. And that, as I said, that was terrifying. That was terrifying, that realization. And through working with my coach, I realized, I think I want to do this. And I remember at the time, I felt like a total millennial stereotype, go to the circus and be like a juggler next. Am I gonna I don't know, take up paper mache? And it would just felt so out of left field, right? It felt so weird, but I was like, no, 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 this is it. This is really, really it. And I looked into certifications. I found one I liked, I got certified and, yada, yada, yada. I became a coach. Of course, it wasn't that like linear, right? There was lots of ups and downs in that process. But yeah, that I feel like there's lots of little moments of me being unbehaved and dismantling my conception and perception of my value and worth connected to following the path, doing the thing the way that they have told you you're supposed to do it. So yeah, Megan, that's a little bit of my story.
Oh my gosh. And this is why I was like, I must talk to you further. This is such a cool story. So I have a bunch of different parts of that I want to go into further. The first being, who do you think was writing those stories of perfection and achievement and needing to outsource your self-worth and all of the stories that were driving your behavior to the point at which you were fairly miserable in your opera career? Where are the stories coming from?
I mean, they're coming from everywhere, right? And they're also coming from inside the house, right? Well, I think when you look at young kids, if they have the privilege, which all kids should, of being raised in a household where there's emotional safety and their parents are present and their parents are loving, and most kids have a really high regard for themselves. Like they really think so greatly of themselves, as we all should. But then there's all these little things that chip away at that high regard. And I think for me, a lot of that came from just that feeling quite literally like not belonging in the way that I looked, in the way that my culture was, in the way that my family was, right? So there was that and just seeing, okay, well, in society, it seems like when you do these things, then you are accepted. Then you're not someone who's out in the outliers of society. They because ultimately we all just want belonging. So I think society was a big part of it. I think another big part of it too, being an immigrant, and I work with a lot of people who are immigrants or folks of color. And there's also this deep guilt that comes, especially, the history for my family was we left Iran because of the revolution and the Iran-Iraq war. And we were very lucky that we were able to immigrate. We weren't refugees. We were able to immigrate. But there's a deep sense of guilt in that, like, your family has uprooted themselves to go elsewhere. This was never voiced by my family, but I felt it, which is like, you better make the best of this because they quite literally left for you, right? Like your family tells you, we left because we wanted better opportunities for you and your sister. And at some point you realize, wait a second, that's a quite a huge thing. And so you want to be able to give them their ROI, prove them right that like this was worth it. Like look at what we're doing with our lives. And so for me that was by doing all of those things and also just the stress of immigrating. And so again, in my mind it was like the less I can be of a problem to my
Mm.
parents, right? The more I can stay in line, the easier this is going to be for all of us because you realize this is not easy. So how can I be the ease here? So I think there was definitely society. And of course, there's like just the patriarchy and white supremacy and all of those things which completely uphold perfectionism and overworking and being hardworking. And like that is where your value is in how much you produce and how much you do. And then as human beings, I think we all have this part of us that questions our worth and value. And so, you internalize all of that and say, okay, well, I guess the answer to all of this is being perfect. Easy, easy peasy. Like, let's just go. Let's do it. But I think as you ask that, it's such a great question. I think as I sit with it now, that's how I would answer. Yeah.
The moment between getting the call from you've got the gig at the Met and singing at the Met, it sounds like a year and a half. You get a therapist, a coach, and there's a significant transformation that happens between those two times. What are the specifics for people who are in oh gosh, I'm in the beginning part of that story? It probably isn't as easy as just go grab a therapist. How was your experience at that time? And what were some of the actual things that really moved you toward a place of self-acceptance?
Yeah. There were, I mean, so many things. I think one of the big ones for me is that, like, I was never conscious of my inner narrative. Like, it was there, it was happening. And it was having a great effect, a huge effect on my life. But I had never really sat down to think, how am I thinking? How am I thinking? and certainly never like questioned how I was thinking. I just thought my thoughts were my thoughts. That's just how it is. And kind of getting a glimpse into like what mindset work is, which I think mindset work gets sometimes a really bad rap because of how it's explained in the coaching world. And mindset work almost just sounds like it's supposed to be like positive thinking, and it's not. It's actually very, very deep work because it's like this deep awareness of like, what is my mind making me think about myself? And sitting with that realization, which is sometimes not a very nice place to be. And then how can I be with this, right? Even before we get to the changing it and shifting it and all that stuff. And then even with the mind stuff, then we come to the body, which is then, okay, well, your mind may be on board with something, but your body may not feel safe about that, right? So it's like all of a sudden realizing, oh my goodness, there's all these parts of me that need to be part of this conversation. So like I was working with a therapist and that's a lot of like talking, which is wonderful, and unpacking my past and really understanding how a lot of these behaviors, as again, I call them coping mechanisms, weren't things to be like praised, like perfectionism, as I thought they would be, but really they were coping mechanisms and understanding why I created them. I mean, that's a whole process where it's just there's a lot of grief, but also so much freedom on the other side when you realize, because I always say I'm a recovering perfectionist, because I think once you're a perfectionist, it's like there's this part of you that is like, "Oh, can I do this better? Oh," it's always there, right? And so just understanding like why these are here and where they come from was like huge for me. And then kind of then doing the somatics around it, which, sometimes looked like meditating or breath work or tapping. I love tapping, emotional freedom technique. So those were some of the things, but I was like quite literally reading every book you can think of, and I actually really loved it. Now looking back on some of the books, I'm like, "Oh, there's some stuff in there that, like, was a little toxic and harmful," but there was also some really great stuff in it, and I remember, like, this was, like, 20 years ago, so this was, like, the rise of, like, the self-help world, the way that we see it and know it now,
Mhm.
where there was a lot of, and there still are, negative connotations with it, and I just remember being, like, having these epiphanies, but, like, having to be very silent about it, which wasn't ideal, but it was like a really I remember it was a really beautiful process of self-discovery. So again, like I think sometimes with this process of healing, we think it has to involve a lot of money. It doesn't. I can't tell you how many podcasts I listened to, how many books I read, that really I can say, wow, they shifted something within me that was profound. So though, yeah, those were some of the things.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'm thinking about this move from I'm an opera singer at the Met to I'm going to be a coach. And they seem very different. And I talk to a lot of people who have stayed in a role or at a company because they have a narrative around sunk cost fallacy. I've invested so much time and energy and I've moved up and blah, blah, blah. Or it's too late to change. What are people going to think? We have some idea that there's people watching us at all times, judging us for every single thing we do in our life, which I have found is not actually true. I'm curious about your experience at this. What does that transition actually look like? And where is the courage coming from to just follow the thing that your heart is calling you toward?
Such a great question. One, I wanna say it's messy. As I said, it's not linear, but there's something, I did then and I now still do, and I give it to all my clients, but I call it my 2-year test. You ask yourself, if nothing changed in my life 2 years from now, if I'm literally, quite literally living the same life that I am living today, how does my body, spirit, and mind feel about that?
Oh,
Right? And yes.
no, like that question?
Right.
That's a great
If
question.
nothing changes, right? And it's like the answer is usually like quite instantaneous, right? And it's okay, but like just and I remember asking myself that when I was singing. I said, if nothing changes in 2 years, like because right, the change has to happen at some point. There has to be a version of you that is courageous enough to ease the load for future versions of you, right? So maybe this is the version today. I think we have a misconception of what courage is. I think we see courage now as these like big acts, right? That like somebody quit their job, somebody moved across the country, somebody divorced their partner. That courage, yes, is courage, but it's just like the tip of the courage iceberg. underneath that big moment, that big monumental shift was all these other very tiny, and I would say even more courageous decisions, like emailing the person, looking at that website, thinking about that thing, journaling that idea. These are pivotal, pivotal moments. In science, they've shown that just sitting with a question starts to change your chemistry in your brain, like the neuroplasticity. So not even answering the question. Because I think again, like I'm a coach, I know people come to me because they want the answer. But the magic and the power is just sitting with the question. What would life maybe look like? What could possibly happen? Where could I possibly go? We don't need to know the answer. It's okay if we're just sitting with a question because that question in and of itself is shifting things. And so I think for myself, looking back to that time, it was a lot of this. It was a lot of sitting with questions and making some very small but very large, courageous inquiries, decisions, moves. And I remember when I realized, okay, I think I want to be a coach. And I was working with my coach and I was like, this just seems wild. Like how can I go from this to that? And I really had that idea. And I know you have Amina on your podcast and she talks a lot about this idea of purpose. I had fallen into that belief, which I think most people have, that your job is your purpose, right? What you do in the world to make money, your career is your purpose. And I thought, well, what's my purpose now? Through working with my coach, I realized, wait, when I was singing, that wasn't my purpose. That was one way that I expressed my purpose, right? It was a vehicle for me to express my purpose. And now that vehicle is coaching. And I think just even that in and of itself, where I could see how, oh, this wasn't a huge jump. This isn't me going from one thing to something else. This is actually very much me following that North Star, which for me, I discovered that my purpose was transforming people through joy. I used to be able to do that on stage, and now I get to do it coaching. And that I think for me was a really, really, really big moment because then, right, that idea of, oh my gosh, all this time and money and all that stuff, like it eased that part of me that was worried about that. And let me tell you, all of that stuff that I did then absolutely applies to what I do now. Like all those skills and all those abilities and all those gifts still apply to what I do today. And I think that when we look around us, the stories that I am inspired by, the stories that I read, I love to read celebrity memoirs. Oh my God, I love them. The stories that I love to read and the movies I love to watch is when people change their lives up, just change everything. Like either things crumble or they decide it's got to change or shift or what. But like those are the stories that I want to listen to and I want to be a part of. And I was like, wait a second, that gets to be my story too. Mine doesn't have to be this like, I just did this for 50 years. No, mine gets to be as compelling and exciting and inspiring as those stories. So yeah, that's what I would say around what kind of helped me make that big, big leap. It was a big leap though. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. What comes up for me is like the moments of micro courage that really are the courage that you need. But I remember when I had the insane idea to launch a print magazine, it was those little, as you were saying them, it was buying the domain name, setting up my
Yes.
email address, sending
Uh-huh.
the email to John Mackey to see if he wanted to be on the cover. Like it was just these like teeny
Yes.
little things. I have a mentee that I work with and she wanted to try to launch a side hustle. And I was like, just post one thing on your website, like just one step, just keep putting one foot in front of the other.
That's it.
And it doesn't have to feel so gigantic and terrible. And
Exactly.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I also, one of the words that you just brought up, joy. I think what a exceptional purpose to be helping people transform through joy. I'm just like, that is so beautiful. And I would say like 6 years ago, I realized I was very disconnected from my joy. And I
Mm,
find a lot of times with ambitious, high performing people, joy becomes something that we kind of put on the sidelines, or it's we'll do that in God knows how many years after we get through this busy season, which has turned into just an entire busy life. How are you seeing people experience of joy in people's lives right now? And how do you tap into your own joy?
Oh, goodness. I think, especially with everything that's going on in the world, which I feel like I've been saying that phrase for a while now, like, it's not new. So it's not right now. It's like, especially with the world as it is, joy is something that we have to be very consciously creating and cultivating. And so it can be something that we easily lose touch with, as you said, right? I always say that happiness happens to you, right? Happiness is like, I don't know, seeing your favorite friend. Happiness is like getting to eat a cupcake when, I don't know, you didn't think you were going to eat the cupcake or whatever, right? That's happiness. But joy is something that is so intrinsic and inner. And to me, joy has a lot to do with being able to accept your life exactly as it is,
Mm.
accept it with all of its beauty and all of its mess, and to not have judgment, to not be trying to push against, to not be ignoring. And I think when I say ignoring, especially the beauty of it, because I think joy also is about being in awe, being in gratitude, which are things, these are things that it's hard to tap into, right? Like for instance, as I'm talking in front of my desk, there's like a magnolia tree outside and all the flowers have fallen because it's like, magnolia trees are so special. It's like what 1 week where they're like totally blooming. But there's one little flower. There's one little flower, one bloom there. And I'm like, that's joy. Like just being able to see that one bloom amidst all of this. And so joy is something that we truly have to be so diligent about, right? But it's so incredibly necessary because I think joy is what buoys us up and joy is what we need to be able to sustain ourselves through times like these. Like if we are compassionate beings, if we are folks who want to make an impact, if we are folks who want to be engaged and present and making a change, we need joy. And we are the exact folks who tend to not prioritize joy, right? Because we're like, I don't have time to look at that magnolia bloom, Shirin, because I need to write my congressperson. Yes. And look at that bloom because that is what's going to sustain you to continue to do that. So, yeah, for me, it's just like a constant practice of like, I have this practice I call stop, pause, savor. And it's like you just stop what you're doing, you pause in the moment, and you savor whatever is around you or whatever you're experiencing. And the more mundane the environment, the better because there really truly is something that you can savor about that moment in your life and and again as people who are doing big brave courageous things we can overlook those things that are so important because we're trying to go to the next thing, we're trying to solve the next thing, we're trying to create the next amazing fantastic thing, but it's like, oh, wait a second, right here there's something that like needs to be appreciated. So
Yeah.
that's a practice that I really need and engage with often.
Oh, I love that. Speaking of big, brave, courageous things, one of the things that I heard you talk about earlier was looking for decolonized approaches to coaching. And you were like, I cannot
Yes.
find it. And so I will build it. Tell us about this. And if someone is saying, what does this even mean? Can you help explain it a little bit further to just understand how cool this is?
Thanks, Megan. So this is part of like my unbehaved journey as well. So when I was trying to find coaching certifications, this was 10 years ago, it was so hard for me to find something that really reflected my values. When I wanted a certification that would offer me skills to be able to work with diverse folks from diverse backgrounds, right? And so I was looking and looking, and it was like so hard for me to find something. And I finally found something that like ticked off most of the boxes. But I recognized that like I would need to do more education to be able to really serve the communities I wanted to work with in a way that I thought was helpful and in integrity. A couple years ago, I was really looking at a lot of certifications because I had a lot of people come to me saying, where did you get certified? Where can I get certified? And I started looking at certifications again and I was like, wait a second, not a lot has changed since I first started my journey 10 years ago. And I just thought to myself, someone should create like a decolonized coaching certification. And I was like, hello. And I was like, oh no, that person
It's
is
me.
me. And it was wild at the time, right? Because I know it's connected to what I'm doing, but like I had a really thriving one-on-one group coaching, business. And I was like, I don't have time to build and do and create and run. But it was just, again, like, it was my purpose, that North Star being this is where the boat's heading, you know? So I created this certification about 4 years ago. We're now starting our fifth cohort of it. And it's a decolonized approach to life coaching. And I know that sounds like, but what does that actually look like? I think if we look at the coaching world in general, folks who are listening to this, and you and I both know this, that coaching is an incredibly transformational modality. Like, it can be something that can absolutely change people's lives. And it's also an industry that is full of toxicity and harm. And it's really hard for folks out there to figure out, like, what is safe. And especially when the more harmful spaces use marketing techniques that really kind of, they prey on your vulnerabilities, they prey on those parts of you that are consumed with, like, scarcity. And I, even me, knowing so much, there's been a few times in the past 10 years where I've signed up for things which later on I said, wow, this is not a safe space for me, right? And so when we think of the idea of, like, decolonizing coaching, it's really about, how do we really understand all the parts of who we are as a coach and accept that and allow that to be part of our practice, and also do that for our clients, right? So how do we, because we cannot help transform, we cannot help, move toward, if we actually can't be with the person that we are and also the person in front of us. And, the folks who I know who want to become coaches want to work with diverse folks with diverse backgrounds and diverse needs. And that means we need to have a toolbox that allows us to do that. So we need to learn things like trauma informed care. We need to learn things like how to work with neurodivergent communities and how to work with, folks of the entire, spectrum, and when it comes to LGBTQIA, we need to, and again, it doesn't mean that that's always who we are serving, but we need to understand how to hold space for that. And also understand that, like, so much of um the way that we think and the way we move in the world upholds oppressive systems. Not that we want to, but right, like me being a perfectionist, me wanting to be a hard worker. So how do we dismantle that? Because that not only affects our coaching practices and, like, how we coach people, but also our coaching business, right? So, like, the last 2 months of our coaching certification, we look at how you can create a sustainable, successful coaching practice that also allows you to thrive. Because I can't tell you how many times, right, people leave their jobs because they're burnt out, because they're being overworked, and they're like, I'm going to go start something myself. And then, Megan, they perpetuate those same damn things in their own business.
Yep.
No boundaries, no, not paying themselves well, like, just all these things, right? So it's like, we need to dismantle this in all of the different ways. So that's been a really exciting, like, last couple years, and me feeling very, like, not behaved, because I feel like I'm like the little black sheep of the coaching community, even though I know this work is so needed and is so important. And, the coaches that have graduated from the program are doing amazing work in the world. But boy, oh boy, sometimes I feel like I'm a little bit on the periphery, but I'm okay being there now. I'm really okay.
I'm so happy you're there. And I mean, when it comes even just the language, oppressive systems, it's been like relegated to this woke land. And when people can actually just like take a step back and approach things with a lens of curiosity and actually wanting to understand, these concepts can be revelatory and
Yes.
transformational. And I'm curious how you're getting around some of the like resistance to some of this language to help people understand how understanding the systems that are influencing our lives on a daily basis actually helps us be better leaders and better family members, better community members. What's the explanation that you're giving to people?
It's so interesting. So we have this conversation often in our coaching community, right? In the certification, which is like, well, the coaches are like, well, how do I explain to people that, like, I'm a decolonized coach? And oftentimes I tell them, you don't need to. You don't need to, right? Because the way that you are going to be holding space is going to be transformational for them. And I think this is the case of like, we're meeting our clients where they're at, right? If I'm working with a corporate client and I say, we're going to be doing decolonized coaching, they're going to say, no, thank you. That's not for me, right? But if I say, okay, we're in our coaching relationship, we're going to be working toward your goals. But in order to get to those goals, we also need to understand what's going on inside, right? Because in order to get anywhere and actually sustain it without me telling you what to do, with you actually coming up with that wisdom, we need to figure out what's in the way. What is the resistance? What's holding you back internally and externally, right? So that's a way of me explaining it, which is like meeting my client where we're at. And also, as we do the work together, absolutely everything that I believe in will come into play. So I again, like I think when you say decolonize, when you say things like white supremacy and capitalism, people think it's like we're sticking it to the man and that's all we're going to talk about all day, but we don't understand that like quite literally this is the air that we breathe. So it as we coach, it's going to be part of it intrinsically and at the heart of it. So it's kind of yeah, and again, it depends on the client, but that's how we generally I like to talk about it because I think like words like mindfulness, like a lot of my coaching practice is rooted in mindfulness. But if I tell a client that, they think we're going to be meditating for 45 minutes. That's not what we're doing, right? So it's like how do you talk about things in a way where clients can actually understand, "Oh, this is of benefit to me." And me understanding as the coach, if I put a term or a label on this, this may actually make them think we're doing something that actually it isn't.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I think we're still at the age where we have to because I think things like trauma informed, that's becoming people are much more understanding of how important that is. But certain other terms, we're still working on it. We're still working on it right now. Yeah.
As you've developed the process, has there been anything that has been particularly surprising for you that of either taking it in a new direction or even just what you're learning about?
What has surprised me well, what has surprised me and not surprised me is the curriculum and the program. It's been transformational for myself and then also everyone who's actually done the program. Everyone finishes the program, the coaches saying, I am a completely different human, right? Because we're not just looking at healing from these very useful ways, right? There's lots of useful things like mindset and even somatics, but we're also looking at how does the world we live in shape how we think? How does the world we live in shape how we dream? Like that's actually one of my favorite modules in the course and also the coaches, which is we talk about goal setting and I talk about how when I first started coaching, I realized I started to notice all of my clients had very similar goals. Like, I can't tell you, Megan, how many times someone came to me saying they wanted to get their MBA, which is fine, totally fine to get your MBA. But I was like, what is going on here? And I realized that we are dreaming within a box of possibility. So, like, even our dreams are colonized. Our dreams are shaped by what people have told us are possible for people like us, what we have seen is possible for people like us. Right. And so that is the lens in which we are dreaming. And I'm like, it's okay. If a client says MBA, cool, let's go with it. But in the process, how can we go deeper? How can we expand their imagination? And maybe at the end, we're still at the MBA, but we have like a deeper connection with it, a deeper why with it. But maybe at the end, we're at somewhere we could have never, ever imagined. And to me, that is incredible coaching, where you can go somewhere with the client that in session one or that discovery call you could have never, ever realized. So it is this thing of realizing, oh my goodness, so much of how we perceive of ourselves and dream and think is so rooted in oppressive systems, but that's okay, we can dismantle it, and we don't have to do it in a way that is aggressive, we don't have to do it in a way that's, like, harsh. It can be so loving, it can be so compassionate, and ultimately really healing.
Oh my gosh, I wish I could just talk to you forever.
Me too.
All right. Last question for
Yes.
listeners. If there was a permission slip that you could give everyone, permission to start doing something today, what would yours be?
The first thing that came to mind is the permission to not care what other people think. I'm not even gonna add to it. We know it's just like the things that we think other people are thinking, they're not. But if they are, this isn't their life. This is your life. This is your life. So the permission to not care what people think. Yes.
Yes. Okay. How do people find you? What are you working on now that you want people to pay attention to?
Yes. So you can find me on Instagram at Wholehearted Coaching. I have two websites. So my personal website for coaching is wholehearted-coaching.com, and the certification is wholeheartedcertification.com. And we just submitted our application to the ICF to become ICF accredited. So we should be hearing about that in the early summer. Yeah.
Thank you. I just am so excited to know you and to hear more about this. And just your work is extraordinary.
Oh, thank you, Megan. I think the same of you. And again, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me here. And thank you for letting me just have this beautiful conversation with you.
Yay. All right, friend, thank you so much for joining me on Unbehaved. If you are vibing with today's episode, I cannot tell you how much a good review means to me. You can find me on all the podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, etc. I love hearing from you. Honestly, I read all of the comments, so please reach out. You can also look me up at meganfrenchdunbar.com or on the social medias to stay in touch. I think I'm supposed to have some sort of like cheesy catchphrase here to wrap this up. But in the spirit of unbehaving, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to subject you to that. And I'll just let this epic stock music play me out instead. Bye-bye.